helping you with Acorn and RISC OS computing.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to come and listen to the talk tonight. Much appreciated. It's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge, as usual. I have spent all day trying to get everything sorted, but needless to say, programmers have a habit of sending new stuff for you to try hours before the show, and they don't always work, let's put it that way. So it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag tonight, bit of a miscellany. Main focus is going to be on the Pinebook Pro, the new laptop that we're in the process of launching. But we'll cover quite a lot of ground. So focus on our comp products, probably touch on a few RISC OS development things along the way, because invariably when programmers are sort of shared, programmers are a scarce resource in the RISC OS world, so programmers end up working on multiple projects. But there'll probably be dribs and drabs of other stuff thrown in as and when product overlap or what have you. I always like to show something that hasn't been seen before. It's not terribly exciting, but I think the exciting bit is what it represents. This is distinctly with a RISC OS Developments hat on, but it will be quite of interest to people when we get to the Pinebook Pro. And that can be seen here. It's looks fairly innocuous. It's a USB adapter with some USB ports and a network port on the end. The ultra observant might notice that this is not an ordinary USB port, but rather a USB-C port. I'm going to say observant, but you can't really tell just by looking at it. The interesting thing is this is not a 100 megabit Ethernet port. And thus far, RISC OS USB Ethernet adapters that you can buy like this have all been 100 megabit. This is, in fact, a gigabit one. So what's so interesting about that, you say? Apart from the fact that gigabit is generally preferable to 100 megabit, it's what it represents. By now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the new RISC OS Developments TCP/IP stack, and that's based on the OpenBSD source tree. OpenBSD has quite a wide range of network drivers supplied with it, all open source. And obviously, one of the aspects of what we're trying to do with the OpenBSD TCP/IP work was to make make lots of interface layers available so that code could be more easily ported from other platforms to RISC OS and see the interfaces that they would expect available and easily sort of map across without a great deal of adaptation, comfort, and rewriting from scratch. What is interesting from this is that a programmer got one at the end of last week, plugged it in, and using something that you'd already sort of thrown together to test something else, managed to get it working in less than 24 hours. He phoned me up in excitement and said, "Andrew, you need to get one of these for your talk on Wednesday." So I duly did, and he sent me the driver this afternoon. And yes, it did work for about 15 minutes, and then it crashed. So we're not using it for the talk tonight. Sorry. But the key thing here is the fact that he was able to bring across network drivers very easily from the OpenBSD world into RISC OS. And why is that in and of itself exciting? Well, as well as wired Ethernet adapters, the OpenBSD source tree has plenty of wireless adapters. And so if we can test bed the harness to bring across the wired USB adapters, then the same test beds and harnesses will work for wireless adapters as well, as long as we're providing the necessary infrastructure. So, yeah, I think that's quite an exciting development in terms of what it represents, even if in and of itself a USB gigabit Ethernet interface isn't terribly exciting beyond the fact that it opens up the door for gigabit Ethernet. Obviously, we're going to be continuing to sort of develop that forward, so hopefully those bugs will be sorted out fairly rapidly. But the key thing is that it's working. It's a Realtek chipset, which is a lot of the cheap USB Ethernet adapters are Realtek. So it will unlock quite a wide range of those Ethernet adapters that currently don't work on RISC OS in a plug-and-play open source manner. I mentioned USB-C. The reason why that's of interest is because the Pinebook Pro, as well as having two USB ports, also has a USB-C port. And this does indeed now work on RISC OS, albeit at USB ordinary speeds. So it's nothing flash, but it does work. So the Pinebook Pro does indeed now have 3 working USB ports on it. I will now introduce you to Pinebook Pro. You can probably see one in the background, depending on sort of next to the monitor in the background with light reflecting off it, making it not particularly visible, but it's there and doing stuff. We'll be remoting into that in a few minutes to do a more hands-on RISC OS demo. But in the meantime, here's one I made earlier. Quite literally. If I close it down, you can have some idea of just how thin Pinebook Pro is. It's made of brushed aluminium. It's extremely light, but it's got a full-size keyboard and a full 1080p screen that's very readable. We do support big mode still, but it really isn't necessary to use big mode anymore, like it was with the original Pinebook. So on one side, which side is this? We have the USB-C mains power, and on the other we have an SD card reader, another USB, and a headphone outlet. The main missing feature is indeed that headphone outlet. There is no audio as of yet, but I'm hoping that's going to be addressed real soon now. That's essentially the only missing feature in terms of sort of parity with the original Pinebook, which was sort of my goal in terms of sort of what I wanted for launch. Although having said that, at this point, quite a few people are using them. We have shipped out quite a few already, simply because sound is not a deal breaker for most people, especially when it's sort of on the cards. As you can see, if I turn it on, it's quite nippy. There's a little LED that goes red and then green as RISC OS boots. And then we have our RISC OS desktop. Hopefully the camera's picking it up okay. This one, I, as I say, literally built it this afternoon, so I haven't formatted up the eMMC. But normally they would boot off the eMMC drive, and that would be the main drive in the system, with the SD card available for either backup or to use as a Linux drive. There are also the laptop chassis itself can also take an NVMe SSD, but it cannot boot off an NVMe SSD directly. The NVMe slot is not a recognized boot device for the chip. So you always need something to sort of, if you like, jerry boot it. And then, from a RISC OS perspective, the NVMe slot is not currently available. Were it to become so, then you could put your boot sequence and things on there quite happily, but you would still need to sort of ROM boot off something other than that in order to kickstart the whole chain. If you use the eMMC in there, then that could be the boot drive all round, so you don't need any additional bits stuck in to boot a RISC OS desktop. But you can have additional boot cards and things if you want to go for multiple operating systems and things. It's quite an exciting product. The Pinebook Pro is part of a family of devices, It's powered by something called the RK3399 ROCC chip ARM CPU. If you imagine sort of the RK3399 as the next step on from a Pi 4 type board, it's currently the sort of pinnacle of the 32-bit ARM, fully 32-bit capable ARM CPUs that we can utilize. By that, I mean ARM processors that can boot and run both in supervisor and user mode in ARX32 mode, which is what RISC OS requires. When I say it's a family of products, the RK3399 is available in a number of different flavors, targeting both or a range of different devices. You've seen a laptop just there. There is a sort of Pi equivalent. There is also almost a drop-in replacement Pi product. I think they spotted a hole in the market with the unavailability of Pi boards and literally produced a sort of port-for-port clone of a Pi that is RK3399 based, which opens up some interesting options. There are all-in-one RK3399 machines. Basically, there are a variety of RK3399 devices available, and the RISC OS port to RK3399 it aims to support a multitude of these. In practice, at the moment, that means that we can support both the Pinebook Pro and the sort of single board computer devices. But I mean, theoretically, because we're talking to the chip directly, more or less any RK3399 board can be brought up quite straightforwardly with only minor modification to the HAL required to do that. So what we're trying to build here is a platform that can go forwards and provide a range of facilities for RISC OS users. And as such, I mean, as I mentioned that we were talking directly to the chip. The purpose of this is so that we have full control of all the processor cores and all the different chip capabilities, the graphics, and so on. The big difference between a Raspberry Pi 4 and the Broadcom chip and the RK3399. From a technical perspective, the RK3399 has a couple of additional low power cores. We don't actually use those for RISC OS because from a RISC OS perspective, A, we're only using one core, and B, we might as well use the fastest core that's available rather than the slower cores. But it is one of these big little processors that you might have seen talked about in ARM literature. The other big difference is it has a built-in USB 3 controller rather than relying on PCI Express for USB 3. What does that mean in practice? It means that the PCI Express bus is essentially free on a RK3399, where it tends to be occupied by the USB 3 controller on a Raspberry Pi. So effectively, this means that the PCI Express bus can be utilized for other purposes, be it PCI Express add-ons or NVMe SSD connectivity. So you tend to see the majority of RK3399 devices with NVMe SSD slots because storage is always the Achilles heel of ARM-based boards. Delivering fast storage on the Pi, your only option is really via a USB 3 on connection, which RISC OS doesn't support. On the RK3399, you've got that capability built into the processor, but you've also got the PCI Express bus as well. So it's essentially an extra layer of flexibility. Plus, the RK3399 clock quite nicely, so it's sort of a minimum of 1.8 gigahertz and can go higher. We during development we had one running at sort of I think 2.2, 2.3 gigahertz, and it delivered sort of really quite impressive benchmarks at those sort of speeds. But even at the 1.8, it's still the fastest stock clocked processor that has been and that's in its laptop form. So it's quite amusing that the sort of fastest stock clock machine is actually now a laptop, although probably quite appropriate for ARM processors given where they've ended up positioned in the market these days. So yeah, Pinebook Pro is the first one that we're bringing to market simply because with the unavailability of the original Pinebook, we needed a new laptop product. So bringing the RK3399 port to market in the Pinebook Pro seemed like a sensible place to start. I think really probably the next thing to do is actually to show you the RK3399 in action, and the Pinebook Pro as a RISC OS device. So I'm now going to screen share. You should all be seeing my Pinebook Pro desktop now. Can I see a thumbs up if that's the case?
Yeah. Can't see the wood for the trees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that looks okay.
Yeah. So basically, if I just give you a quick tour of the desktop, you'll see down in the bottom left-hand corner, the CD drive is simply to allow us to open ISO images of CDs, or we could plug in a USB CD drive and connect to that. eMMC4 is what I've called the internal eMMC drive. The eMMC provides a faster than SD internal storage device on the Pinebook Pro. Essentially, it's not quite an SSD, but it's more than an SD card. It basically provides an excellent main storage drive for RISC OS inside the Pinebook Pro. And as you'll see, if I load something like Iris, it's quite nippy. I'm connected to the network. So as I say, we have the RISC OS ShareFS connection, and you can see the SD card icon represents the SD drive. I have an SD card in there, which is simply a development card that I use for testing things. HID has been updated to support simple gestures on the Pinebook Pro touchpad. The author of HID has a Pinebook Pro of his own and is sort of keen to do cool stuff with the HID and the touchpad on the Pinebook Pro. And obviously a RAM disk, which can be huge because we have a full 4 gig of RAM. At the moment I'm using, I think, how much are we? RAM disk. I'm using a 256 meg RAM disk, but you can see right now we have 3.3 gig free from a 4 gig pool. So yeah, we go to testing and we run Iris. This is from a cold boot. So this is without using the Iris RAM add-on, so you're just seeing it literally from the main hard drive at this point. So as you can see, it's pretty nippy. I'm using Iris as a demonstration because it's about the most demanding RISC OS application that currently exists. So if we can deliver decent performance in Iris, then we can deliver decent performance in pretty much anything. Obviously, coming over the network, things like scrolling are going to look a little bit iffy, but you can see that that's bowling along quite nicely. We can do sort of things like the RISC OS Open website. Or the old favourite, the icon bar, and so on. Obviously, we can go even faster. We can utilise our newly released Iris RAM tool. Iris RAM basically allows you to automate Iris installation to RAM disk, which gives additional performance boosts when you're using Iris, and you can see how quickly that loaded to the icon bar. when using Iris RAM. So as you can see, it's pretty rapid. I noticed in the chat somebody was saying that they got one of the Pinebook Pros already and commenting on how fast it all is. I did a quick benchmark today, just before, I think it's this middle one. Yeah, 11th of January 2023 at 4:44 this afternoon, which is a current ROM benchmark. I've lost Iris. I was going to bring up Chris Hall's how fast thing as a sort of comparison, so we can see how it performs to other RISC OS machines. S3RSIG. So I think my results are slightly different to what Chris recorded, possibly because of different ROM versions or something. But I mean, I think the fastest stock clock machine at the moment is the Pi 400. And if we just take a look at the sort of first few numbers, we're just beating it out on the processor. The RAM, 35,000, 43,000. Slightly pipped on the rectangle copy, but not by much. I should say that since I first announced the project at the end of last year, we have developed a Neon-based general purpose acceleration set of routines, which is how we're managing to sort of more or less match the Pi 400's dedicated graphics chip stuff. The Neon code that we've developed is applicable to pretty much any modern ARM processor, so that's something that can be cross-ported to other boards as needed. Although something like the IMX6 has already got a hardware graphics add-on, so it's probably less needed. We're in the process of expanding that to do a bit more as well, but because this is general code, and it's nice to have utilizable stuff that we can bring to any chip or port that we require for faster graphics. So icon plotting, and so on. So basically, and so on. Basically, it's fast and portable. So these are all running on battery. As I say, we can, in theory, go faster by clocking up, but on your laptop, you generally want to have a blend of performance versus battery. So, for example, if we look and load a CPU clock, you'll see that the clock speed started off at 1800 and then it's dropping down. It's jumping up because I'm sending stuff over the network, so the act of pumping a RISC OS desktop that's sort of probably 60 frames a second over an Ethernet adapter is putting a certain tax on the CPU. So it's not sort of just sat at 400 meg as it was earlier on this afternoon. It seems to have settled down, but it'll start jump up and down as required. We have full brightness control, so if you look over my shoulder, the screen is quite dim. If I bump it up, of course you can't look over my shoulder because you're seeing my desktop. So you'll just have to take my word for it that the screen is getting brighter and darker as I.
If you have your screen in split view mode.
Oh right, okay. Well, we'll take Ruth's word for it.
I can see it.
Okay. So suffice to say that it gets brighter and darker as I move the thing. We also have a screensaver. If we go to screen, you'll see you've got Pine Dim, which is a screensaver that we've developed that basically auto dims the screen down when it's idle. So if you leave it idle for a couple of minutes, it will dim it down. You can still see just about what's on the screen in its dim state. But moving the mouse or what have you will bring that back to whatever the previous brightness was Brightness is, of course, fully configurable. If we go to Pine Tools, which is supplied as standard with the laptop, you can see I've got it set to boot at 12%, because I was using it for this demo, and this afternoon I haven't got it on any mains power, so I'm just wanting to conserve battery. It's surprisingly usable even at sort of 25% brightness. The brightness curve, in my opinion, is a bit skewed in the sense that I can quite happily use it at quite low brightnesses, and turning the brightness up a lot doesn't actually make that much of a difference. That's the sort of, if you like, 0 to 10% makes a lot of difference. 10 to 25, certain amount. 25 to 75, not all that much, but that's how these things work. As usual, we've got the big mode for people who struggle with the screen, but with a 14-inch 1080p IPS panel, with RISC OS being that bit larger than other operating systems anyway, in terms of its default point size of 12 point versus 10 point on other operating systems. I honestly feel that you won't be using big mode on Pinebook Pro. Also, with thanks to Bernard Veazey, we have large pointer mode as well for those who need it. Current battery level 79%. We can load battery manager at startup, etc. If you're familiar with the original Pinebook, this is all largely the same. Built-in networking capability, showing us our current IP address. Networking is all plug and play. I can literally unplug it. So if I go over to the laptop, unplug the connection, you will see that in a moment it will lose. Expecting it to start telling us it's no connection. Doesn't seem to have noticed so far. I'm plugging it back in again. And we should find, okay, its attempt says now saying we're attempting to reconnect. And there we are. I don't know whether you saw, but there were little messages appeared in the bottom right-hand corner about it sort of detecting the plug-in of the network cable and reallocating all the addresses and things.
That won't have happened, Andrew, because obviously you disconnected from the network. You're no longer sending the information to the VNC client. Okay,
it did seem to be here. It was updating on the VNC client was updating, but maybe it didn't come through. Okay, so if you didn't see that, apologies. It did flash up on my as the process proceeded, but either way, basically the networking is fully dynamic in the desktop, which is important in a laptop device. It means you can literally just sort of plug and play with Ethernet connections, or use wireless adapters and just literally plug them in while the laptop is running and have it just all sort itself out for you. It'll acquire a network address, configure the resolvers and so on, all dynamically on the fly. There's built-in facilities for automatically sharing your main drive, so you can plug it in, connect it up, and have your hard disk shared on your network with your other RISC OS machines. As you can see, built-in VNC serving options. So that's how we're doing the remote access and showing it via Zoom. Is we've simply ticked the box to enable VNC access in Pine Tools, and told it to turn that on at startup. And that means I can just remote straight into the Pinebook from my Zoom PC. This can also be started and stopped at will as part of Pine Tools. I'm sure many of you have seen Pine Tools and its variants, such as Forte Tools or PyTools in different variants. It's the sort of latest version for use with Pinebook Pro. So main emissions right now are the sound. As I said, that's something that we want to get working. You can, at the moment, use sound via USB audio devices. The USB stack supplied does support isochronous USB devices, so USB audio devices can be connected, but you can only use limited applications to send audio out that way. So whilst you can listen to music and things, you can't use it as a general purpose RISC OS sound system, which sort of limits the usefulness of that. But it is a solution if you want to listen to your MP3 collection or something. The other two sort of flies in the ointment. The USB-C port, which I mentioned, can also do graphics via DisplayPort alternate path, I believe is the technical term. This is something that we have been looking into, and the circuitry is under RISC OS's control, but actually doing clever things with multiple desktops and things requires additional code that we haven't sat down and actually done yet. So I think it's a lot more practical to do video out via the USB-C port on Pinebook Pro, but it isn't something that we've actually spent a lot of developer time on, simply because we've been concentrating on other aspects to try and get the thing ready and working reliably. And that's the other big change since I first talked about this in December. Pinebook Pro at the time had some stability issues that would lock up and what have you. Actually, no, it's been since November, because this was fixed at the end of November. Basically, we managed to track down some partially documented Chinglish documentation errata that basically the recommended way of changing the clock speed was not the recommended way of changing the clock speed in practice. So once we'd implemented the, well, you can do it this way, but actually you might find it's better to do it that way addendum, then clock speed stability issues from earlier builds were resolved, and it's now been rock solid since. So it's good to have those problems behind us. So, it feels solid. It does what it needs to do. It's fast, and so the final missing piece of the jigsaw would be the Wi-Fi chip. And as I touched on at the beginning of the talk, this is something where programmers are beavering away to see what they can do in terms of making the porting of drivers straightforward into RISC OS for Wi-Fi capabilities. As you know, or may remember, the actual, if you like, RISC OS interface layer for Wi-Fi chips via the SDIO bus was developed about a year ago by RISC OS Developments for pretty much every RISC OS platform under the sun. And it's been gradually filtering its way through the RISC OS source tree over the past year. So actually communicating to the SDIO chip is already there. If we go open the task window and kind of SDIO dev, you will see the different devices on the SDIO bus. So you can see this are actually sort of three different buses, 0, 1, and 2. You can see the SD card, the Samsung Pro SD card in bus 0. Then you have bus 1, which is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth Broadcom chip, and you have the eMMC as bus 2. So it's seeing the chip, and as I say, from a driver perspective, that's what I was talking about at the beginning. The developers are looking at ways to facilitate easy driver porting from OpenBSD. The actual code for SDIO also includes the ability to make relatively easy porting from Linux drivers as well as BSD-based drivers. So the code is there to sort of try and make bringing across the drivers as straightforward as we can. Of course, there's what you can do in theory and what you can do in practice, and that's why we've been concentrating on trying to do the USB device, USB Ethernet device, as a proof of concept for the harnesses, and then the Wi-Fi ones, which require additional layers, 802.11 Wi-Fi tech in the stack, making sure all of those connections are opened up so that the drivers can find the bits that they're looking for when they come across. So it's in progress. More news when we have it, really. So yeah, that's pretty much state of play for Pinebook Pro. As far as the devices are concerned, we have Pinebook Pros in stock and we can supply them right now. Price including RISC OS for the first batch is £499. That includes VAT. It's quite possible that future batches will be more expensive simply because of the varying pound, that we bought these in at a time before the economy went south. So we're able to do them at this price for now. What price we'll be able to buy them in for the next batch, I don't know. But that's the if you like, the early adopter price. In my head, I suspect it will be slightly more expensive later on. Yeah. At that point, I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. Before I move on to other topics, does anybody have any questions about the Pinebook Pro or the RK3399 platforms and what we're doing with those?
Yeah, I've got just a quick one about the Wi-Fi. Are you also working on Bluetooth with that?
It's not a priority at the moment. I know there is a guy in Holland that has been working on Bluetooth for a while. I don't know, I haven't heard from him for a little while, so I'm not sure where he's standing on that. It is, as you can see, it was visible, but Bluetooth is a separate stack that isn't presently available. I think Dave Hickton did some work towards it as well.
Okay, I'm just interested because
the Wi-Fi falls within what we're trying to, what RISC OS Developments is working towards.
Right.
Bluetooth would be a separate project that, as I say, it's probably a less priority simply because it's of less immediate use in terms of what people are doing with their RISC OS machines.
Yeah, it just goes with the sound, really. I mean, these are nice new Bluetooth headphones I got for Christmas, and it'd be nice to connect them to RISC OS as opposed to Apple's. And
yeah.
So not a problem.
As somebody who is a bit of a purist, I find that the compression algorithms used for Bluetooth audio tends to be a bit less than
it's a lot better than the speaker that comes out the back of the computer.
Oh, right. That's fair enough then.
And it's better than the speaker that comes out the back of my HDMI screen as well.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're getting good quality from your Bluetooth headphones.
Andrew, will the next batch of machines have a UK keyboard? Because they don't seem.
As far as I know, the UK keyboard model was only produced for a very short period of time. There's no ETA on it. Certainly, I've not been told of any availability. So they are the international keyboard versions rather than the UK ones.
Okay.
Andrew, can I just ask, what's the battery life?
Slightly less than an original Pine book, which was sort of crazy long. Original Pine book was something like 13 hours or something, I think, if I remember rightly. This, an idle power, sort of turning on, don't do anything with it other than sort of poking and prodding it every hour or so to see how we're doing. It did about 10 hours. So I would say that in a more real world usage, you would expect to see sort of 6 to 8.
Thank you.
In other words, it should be good for a working day.
I don't think I could fit 68 hours of work in a working day, to be honest. I try not to, anyway.
It does charge back relatively quickly from the mains charger, from what I've seen. So it's not a major problem.
It's an excellent machine. Well done.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat. Is it set up to run Linux as well, and is it easy to switch between?
Okay, yeah. So basically, yes, we can do them as RISC OS only, or we can do them as RISC OS plus Linux. The way your Pinebook Pro boots is not as graceful as the original Pinebook was, in the sense that its priorities are a bit weird for multi-booting. Essentially, the original Pinebook always defaulted to, I think, the override was always the SD card. So if you put something in the SD card slot, that would be what it would boot off. If you didn't put anything on the SD card slot, it would boot off the eMMC. That's very logical, makes a huge amount of sense. Whoever designed Pinebook Pro, or I suspect it's the actual ROCC chip, was not quite as sensible. The eMMC takes priority over the SD card. So basically, if you write something to the eMMC, then that is what will boot regardless of what's in the SD card slot. So that does make multi-boot type setups a little bit tricky, because if you install Linux to the eMMC, then that's what you're ever going to get. So what we do is, for people who want multi-boot setups, we supply them with two separate SD cards, one for RISC OS, one for Linux, and basically you just put in whichever one you want when you turn it on, and it will boot into whichever operating system you want.
Andrew,
yep.
On the Titanium, there's an application under RISC OS that will switch you into Linux. Is it possible to have a RISC OS application that will tell the machine to start up again, but in Linux?
Well, I mean, you'd have a slight problem there about where to store the Linux, because it's got, the chip's got to actually boot load off something. So if you're in RISC OS, you would have probably a RISC OS boot card in. So you would physically need to change things around before you could do that, at which point you might as well just shut down, change the card and reboot.
I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking if you had RISC OS booting from eMMC,
yeah,
with a Linux card on SD,
I see, have the Linux card.
then you could simply have an application under RISC OS that would tell the system to. I'll
be honest, it's not something that we've looked into. I mean, in theory, you could possibly do something like Titanium does. I'll be honest, on my own Titanium, that program failed, and I lost the ability to access Linux quite some time ago on my own Titanium. So I'm not the biggest fan of sort of software implementations, because it can leave you up a gum tree. It's something that we can look into, but I don't think it's going to be a priority for our guys, simply because we're more focused on trying to get more of the RISC OS functionality done rather than sort of doing Linuxy stuff. But I mean, in theory, if you replace, yeah, I suspect it's theoretically possible. How easily doable, I don't rightly know.
Okay, thanks.
You can install Linux to the NVMe drive, and one project that we've seen is people using the essentially just putting a bootloader on the SD card, and then essentially jumping from there to the NVMe. So essentially, the SD card just basically says, "Hey, let's boot Linux," and then immediately hands off to the NVMe drive once a little bit is loaded to allow it to access the NVMe, and that way you can have your Linux on an NVMe, a fast NVMe drive, and your RISC OS on the eMMC, so that both operating systems have high-speed storage. That's not something I've tried personally, but it is something that I've seen talked about on the Pinebook forums and things.
Yeah, I should think it's partially the focus of that you didn't have Iris running as well as you did on the Pinebook. So Linux was sort of a place to go to get a better web browsing experience. But with Iris now running sensibly on both, I suppose that aspect isn't as important now, is it?
Well, I mean, Wi-Fi would be is the big killer feature. If we can get Wi-Fi plus Iris, then Linux it becomes rather more limited use. I mean, LibreOffice is still quite a helpful addition, and there are things that you can do in Firefox that you can't in Iris. But
but becoming less so.
Becoming less so. Agreed.
Yeah. There's another thing in the chat. It's talking about USB-C charging under RISC OS for the Pinebook Pro. Is that a possibility?
When I looked at, if you take the back off the Pinebook Pro, there's a sort of thing where it says, if you want to do charge, I'm racking my brain here a little bit, but there was a little note that came with it that kind of said, do one or other, but not both.
Right.
And there was a little switch and some wires. So we've tended to sort of focus on the charging port. I don't know, it might be possible to flick a switch and have it do something with the USB port inside. I
was just wondering because I know a few people said they had problems using the wired Ethernet. If they were trying to charge at the same time, it actually drew slightly more than was going in, so the battery would still go down. So I don't know if that was
on the original Pinebook. I don't know if it's the same on Pinebook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
At the moment, I haven't found that to be a necessary thing.
Okay.
My Pinebook Pro came with an adapter marked only for use on Pinebook Pro. So I think it's possibly a slightly stronger charger.
Yeah. I think the previous one was sort of like towards the edge, wasn't it, in using and charging?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest with you, but it seems to be good in practice. So.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Obviously, things like the USB-C port are something that we're really just at the beginning of exploration of what we can do with that. I mean, this is the sense. I think this is pretty much the first time a USB-C port has been used like this for RISC OS in this manner via the XHCI protocols. So, it's the beginning of a journey, not the end of a journey.
That makes sense. Thanks. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing with RK3399 as a whole, is that because it's the family of products, this is something where, you've seen it with to some degree with something like the Minim and the ARMX6, where essentially the two products share very similar technology, and that's meant that we've been able to keep issuing updates and things for both of them for a nice long time. The Minim, in terms of sales figures, wouldn't, it's not a big seller. It was a product that was cool, but it was being a super tiny computer is a niche market. But because essentially not quite one size fits all, but one size more or less fits all, it means that we can maintain and support products even when with quite limited user bases, because producing those ROMs is straightforward from the same source tree. So with RK3399 being a family of products, there's a reassurance that comes with knowing that there'll be RK3399 for desktop, 3399 for laptop, and so on going forwards. So this can be an evolving product as we add functionality and features overtime to it, and what have you. Of course, that doesn't mean we've sort of given up on the original Pine book. We might not be able to buy any more of them, but we have, we issued updates for the original Pine book at the end of last year. RMX6 received updates also at the end of last year. We've got updates more or less ready to be launched for our other machines as well. So, and there's been beta versions for most of them available throughout the course of last year. So, lots of updates and things coming out for all the different platforms that we support, and Lord may they do so.
You mentioned overclocking. Is that advisable on the Pinebook Pro? And if so, is there going to be any sort of application which will enable us to do it?
Pass. It's something that's been done at sort of, if you like, by accident by the programmer setting values and doing his maths wrong, rather than it being sort of a user accessible feature at the moment. But what something that is one day a programmer typo can very easily be made to be accessible to end users just by bringing it out as a sort of pokeable value. So I would say watch this space, but no immediate promises. As for whether it's worth doing on a Pinebook Pro, I would probably say no, don't bother. The benefits, even on desktop machines, of overclocking our RISC OS processors are highly debatable. I mean, yes, Iris does benefit slightly from higher clock speeds, but generally speaking, it's the system as a whole. If you've got a slow disk and you stick a really fast processor on it, it's still going to have a slow disk. It doesn't magically fix the things that are slow. So, with an eye to battery and everything else, laptop and the chassis, there's decent heat dissipation through the chassis, but I honestly feel like, apart from the sort of geek cred, I can't see much more advantage to overclocking a laptop like that, particularly. So yeah, as others have said, it's a nippy piece of kit even at stock speed. So yeah. I see comment about using the other cores. Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on the fact that we have control over the CPU in an almost unprecedented way. So yes, we can bring, and indeed do bring up all the CPU cores and then park them. And we can choose which CPU we use, whether we use the fast ones or the slow ones, and so on and so forth. So I would certainly, much as we did for the IMX6, I would expect that before too long, don't be too surprised if you see RK3399 multi-core ROMs available, at least for developers to play with. How much practical use they are, I don't know, but I know certain developers run the multi-core IMX6 ROMs just as their stock ROM, and that's what they do. It doesn't really bring any performance advantage because you actually have to utilize those cores in code, and there's nothing that does so. But I think some programmers get a kick out of having it available and know that they can write code that does so, as long as they're careful. Yeah, I mean, it's there certainly as an option, and don't be too surprised if you start seeing that available on Pinebook Pro. Any other questions, or shall I move on to other projects?
No questions, but I'd say that my Pinebook Pro is pretty good. It's very fast. It works well with Iris, and I'm very pleased with it. Since the last ROM was put in, I've tried my hardest to break it, and I've been able to. So well done. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, so I will go back to screen sharing, and we'll actually, before I do that, I'll just talk very briefly about our other sort of hardware product that we're shipping quite a lot at the moment, and that remains our Slot A2 product. Raspberry Pi 4, subject to getting stock. I'm trying to keep the price the same despite paying up to 4 times as much as the RRP for a Pi 4. Thank you to the scalpers on eBay. We do our best to continue shipping. We can also adapt existing Pi 4s into Slot A2s. If you already have a Pi 4 that's in the bottom of the drawer and you're thinking, hey, it'd be nice to have a cool machine with an SSD, they dual boot into RISC OS and Linux, all-round fun RISC OS machine that runs very quickly. So you've got a solid-state disk in there, you've got the front SD card, you've got multiple USB ports, HDMI graphics, and as I say, dual boot capability. So it's a nice system. You can share space between RISC OS and Linux, transfer files. I should say that when we do the dual boot machines, it is also possible to have shared storage space for transferring files on the PineBook Pro between RISC OS and Linux. So you do have some shared storage space there that allows you to, say, use Firefox on and then download something and then have it available on RISC OS without having to sort of do any sort of kung fu with the with SD cards or USB sticks or anything like that. That's done entirely within the realms of the laptop, much as it is on the Slot A2. So those remain our sort of priority machines at the moment in desktop and laptop spaces. We also have things like the Time Machine from Titan available, and we also have, I'd like to say RMX6s, but I think the last RMX6 chassis may well have found a home. So the RMX6 is sort of gradually fading out as the other machines come in to take its place. But I think it's sort of 2014 to 2023, 7 years, 9 years. Sorry, mental arithmetic. It's not a bad stint for a RISC OS machine. I don't know how long the RISC PC managed, possibly a year longer. But I mean, under Acorn's management, it was 94 to 97, 98. So, I think the RMX6 has earned its pension. And it's good that we have new RISC OS machines and boards and chips coming along to take their place. Longer term, obviously, we need to explore things like 64-bit and how to handle that, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, the RK3399 represents largely the sort of pinnacle of AArch32 as it stands. I think what we're probably going to see is that for the minority of users, this level of performance ends up being, if you like, the pinnacle for now. But as somebody mentioned in chat, the importance of multi-core, etc., going forwards will become something that we need to explore to really expand what RISC OS is capable of, because if we can't go too much further forward in terms of newer CPUs in the immediate term, then fully utilizing the CPUs that we already have would seem like the next best thing. I would expect to sort of see a push towards development of that as the sort of next route to more scope performance for RISC OS, whilst projects are explored for how best to utilize 64-bit. For those that aren't familiar, the 64-bit ARM chips are wildly different to 32-bit ones. It's not just a case of use a sort of search and replace algorithm to replace 32-bit commands with 64-bit commands. The AArch64 instructions really went back to square one and designed a whole new instruction set. As this sort of wildly different stroke, more commands, wildly different, more registers. It's a whole other ballpark. So I mean, I'm not saying somebody couldn't automate the process, but it's not a 5-minute job to convert RISC OS to 64-bit. We are looking at a variety of different solutions with my RISC OS Developments hat on, ranging from sort of 32-bit emulation processes to sort of more native solutions. And I think ultimately we're probably going to see a variety of solutions that deployed in different timeframes that, sort of slightly more quick and dirty solutions in the immediate terms to utilize faster processors, with more elegantly engineered solutions taking longer, and coming on stream later. The worry at the back of all of our minds is the fact that availability on parts, particularly in a sort of post-COVID electronics industry world, you can't make guarantees on availabilities of things. So if availability of parts on, say, Pies dries up, as it has done, and isn't easily replaced, then we may need to look at sort of less elegantly engineered but adequate solutions in the sooner rather than later, whilst still wanting to address it properly, as it were, going forwards. But there's quite a lot of behind-the-scenes discussions going on how best to do this, and this is not really the time for me to go into too much detail on that, especially as I'm supposed to be talking with an Archon hat on and not a RISC OS Developments one. So back to screen sharing and back to some more software. Let's see the buttons. Share screen, share Pinebook Pro. So when I haven't been doing things related to Pinebook Pro and Pine Tools and other things and building things, just generally working myself into a frazzle, we have Photodesk. As some of you may know, XAT bought Photodesk from CJE sort of 18 months ago, but it got stuck in limbo under XAT's ownership, where technically it wasn't available from either company because XAT hadn't got it released. So I approached XAT and said, look, this is daft. Let me do some work on sorting some stuff out for you that you haven't got time to do yourselves. And so basically I did some updates to Photodesk to get it out the door for XAT last year, and so that is now available on Plingstore. Since then, with the help of RAWCC and I think Detlef and Willy in Germany, some more source code has been tracked down, so we've got some more source than I think we have for a while on Photodesk. And so I've been tinkering away with Photodesk 3.20. To be honest with you, not a wild amount of new stuff. Indeed, most of it's bug fixes. We have a chap doing a new manual for Photodesk. This is sort of not that file. Is it? Let me just see. New manual, that's what I want. So I think it's this one. Not ready for actual release, but the focus of the new manual is on technique rather than what functions do. So in other words, it's more of a tutorial manual than a what a button does, although there's a certain amount of that as well. You'll see, I'm just sort of trying to scroll through. There you are. Example, firework montage. You can see the different slides that have been used, and the author describes the techniques used to create the final effect, so that you can actually follow the tutorials and see how things are actually done. This was quite important because we felt that Photodesk was one of those programs that on paper it's this immensely powerful program that about 5 people know how to use. So I count myself in that category that, I can look at the source code, I can tinker with things, I can load things into it and export things out of it, but actually using it for productive work, I am not not even I could barely count myself as a beginner, let alone an expert. So the manual has basically been done from scratch. The author did actually start work on it some years back, but then his RISC PC died and lost a lot of work. So actually started recreating things from scratch, and we supplied him with the Forte 2 to help him sort of do things. So he does a bit on Linux and a bit on RISC OS and compares and contrasts, and just generally it's been amazing how quickly he's put all of this back together again, from essentially just notes, I think, more or less. So, yeah, Photodesk manual coming along nicely.
I'll just pop a question, Andrew, about the Photodesk and the manual. Is it connected with the Vermilion Sands website?
It is, yes.
Okay, fine.
A chap called Chris Terran is the author, but I'm being a bit careful because I don't know how much he would want to be directly contactable, as it were, about this. I do know that he's marked the existing versions not for distribution, so I'm not allowed to sort of send them out to people. Yeah,
well, I'll still use his website for the tutorials, so yeah, I'm hoping he's still there. That's good news.
Yes. Basically, he dropped out of the scene for a while, but because largely he'd given up hope on anybody ever doing anything with Photodesk again. So he was sort of more than a bit pleased to hear that it wasn't completely dead. So he sent me this PD report, which has got various bugs and things. It's various pages of things that reporting, and I've been going through that, trying to see what things I can reproduce and or fix. So to be fair, it's mostly the sort of simple stuff that I've been able to, the low-hanging fruit, as it were, that I've tackled so far.
You're going to jump straight from 3.14 something to 320, are you?
Yes, because there were versions 3.14-17 and 18 and 20. And we had people calling it 3.18 rather than 3.14-18. So it seemed rather more sensible that since this was a new product under a new ownership, 3.20 was the way to go.
Excellent.
So that's the logic there. Hopefully keeps it a little bit simpler for everyone. But there is still a little bit more bug fixing that I want to do before I make that update available. But it will be free of charge to anybody who's already grabbed it from Blink Store. Essentially, it's available. It is a paid-for product, but I say the updates will be free. What we've done is we've set a sort of nominal RRP of, I think, £49, it's 42, I think. It was designed to be half of whatever it sold for previously anyway. So basically we cut the price by half. And then we said, look, we know that a lot of people have got versions from all sorts of different places. Don't ask any questions. And that everybody likes an upgrade price rather than having to pay RRP. So what we've said is in a sort of no questions asked upgrade policy. If you've got or used Photodesk before, you can have it for a £29 upgrade price. As I say, no questions asked as to origins. Right. And that gives you the latest, access to the latest stuff. We've removed the copy protection, so you no longer have to. Previously, it was a bit of a pain in the neck. You couldn't transfer it between machines. You had to reinstall it on each machine manually, and that meant that settings and things could be a problem to transfer. So we've done away with the protection. You can literally drag and drop the program to copy it and its resources between machines. And we're looking at standardizing choices settings. One of the things that I introduced in this latest version is different sets of choices for both RISC PC class hardware and RISC OS 5 systems. particularly in terms of memory defaults and other default settings. Obviously, a RISC PC with 32 meg or something is a very different case to a Raspberry Pi with 4 gig of RAM. And with sort of the average smartphone outputting, 50 plus megapixel images these days, it's ridiculous. You generate some huge images just routinely these days, let alone through sort of fancy Nikon cameras and the like. So what we've done is to create 2 different profiles for the different operating system versions, so that memory usage is different on the 2 platforms. And that way, we can still run on a 26-bit machine and sort of still probably give a better experience on a 26 machine than they had before, but also embrace the newer hardware and deliver a greater out-the-box experience. So that instead of, if you loaded an old version of Photodesk onto a Raspberry Pi and then did even a moderately sized sort of, 4 megabyte JPEG or something into it, it would go horrifically slow out of the box. Now it'll just load it up and there you go. It makes the sort of actual user experience running Photodesk out the box on modern hardware much more pleasant. It's stuff like that we've done. I've also made it not default to the previously, whenever every image that you loaded, it would store on a permanent clipboard. So, if you just loaded an image just to look at it quickly and then closed it, you'd be stuck with that image in your clipboard forever, unless you manually removed it from the global clipboard. I've turned that feature off by default now, so that you can just view an image in Photodesk and then close it just like you would in any other program, without having to sort of go through the sort of double step of removing it from the clipboard history as well.
So you have to drop it onto the clipboard now to get it in there, do you? Yeah,
if you want it in the clipboard, you can do, but it's not there permanently unless you do. That is still an option, but the default is a sort of transient type setup rather than a permanent setup. As I say, it's configurable, but it's just trying to present the user with a slightly less annoying set of defaults than we saw previously. Similarly, we've adjusted for which file types the program will hog out the box, just made it play nicer with RISC OS applications, so that, for example, you can have it. I think JPEGs, for example, you often want to view with something like a private eye or something like that for quick viewing, but want to add it in Photodesk, where previously, the moment the computer saw Photodesk, it would load Photodesk for JPEGs. Now the default is that for JPEGs it will claim them if nothing else has, but it won't override them unless it's actually running. In which case, it will. If you run Photodesk, it understands that you probably want to use it. If you haven't run it, it gives other applications a look in first. So it's just trying to make the program more sensible for users. And as I say, with the new, much lower pricing, I think it's put Photodesk back in the ring in an area where pretty much anybody can have one of the top RISC OS applications. Alongside things like Ovation Pro, Impression, Artworks. It's one of those desert island RISC OS programs, and most people can have it for sort of 29 quid. So it's I think it's
a no-brainer, Andrew. It's a brilliant program.
Well,
wouldn't like to do without it.
You know what I mean. And as I say, I'm trying to sort of tinker with it as best I can, and get more and more source availability. We're also more open with the source. So if anybody wants to play with Photodesk, just talk to us and we'll send you source code, etc. It's not what we don't want to do. For a while, it was being developed by a guy called Nicholas Weiss in Switzerland, and sadly, Nicholas died, and he was a bit of a recluse. So it was one of those things where sort of nobody knew for a while, I think, fortunately, he'd been in touch with a few RISC OS people and sent a few things out. Otherwise, everything would have been lost. Some of the guys over in Germany were able to retrieve some of the stuff. So thankful, big thanks to the German RISC OS community for saving that. Otherwise, we could have really been up a gum tree. Yeah. So that's the situation with Photodesk. Also put out a new Fireworks, although the Fireworks changes are relatively limited. It's been a free upgrade as for existing Fireworks Pro users. Where are we? I believe that is in Show Demo, Comp, Fireworks Pro. So it's November 2022. So that's, as I say, not a great deal to show. It was sort of updating sorry, brain's gone dead for a second. Some changes to scientific notations, a couple of additional spreadsheet functions, better documentation of spreadsheet functions. I was trying to see if I've got the release notes. I did see them earlier, and I don't know what I did. I think it's here. Okay. Yeah, it can import tab separated files from your TSV, improve scrap handling, latest C tools developments, some changes to keystroke handling. Nothing outstanding, but just ticking over with a new version just before Christmas. One thing I have been doing with Fireworks is trying to make its tabling facilities more accessible for people. So we introduced the table sheet example as a way of showing people what could be done for a tabling perspective with Fireworks. Obviously, TableMate was the go-to program for creating tables in RISC OS, but sadly, there isn't a 32-bit version of TableMate available. So Fireworks provides a range of tools for sort of resizing cells and changing cell borders, doing shading and so on, which and then obviously can be used to do calculations and things within the tables. So we provided a table sheet demonstration, and the product comes with various examples of things of how to use that, and you can now export, as I've shown previously, live export of well, you can save as a draw file for the thing, but you can also save out embedded save as embedded OLE files, which can be dropped straight into things like Impression and Ovation, so that those programs can show Fireworks files natively, and those are sort of dynamic files that can be edited and re-edited with formulas and things. So you can use it to create tables that contain live contents, which can then be suitably edited later, much as sort of something like TableMate allowed you to do with Impression. So if we go on to EMC4 and then go to Ovation Pro. In case you missed it, Ovation Pro is now free of charge and can be downloaded from David's website and from Kling Store, etc., as a free download. It is included with all of our machines as standard as a result, with David's permission. So we can just sort of create a frame, put our thing in, and then we can close our spreadsheet, and we can be typing away, and then we can decide we want to change our table, and then we can edit it and put some numbers in that, save that, and you can see that's gone straight back into the table in Ovation Pro. So basically, using Fireworks as a replacement for something like TableMate is very practical and something fun that we're sort of encouraging people to try out with Fireworks now going forwards. That's probably where I want to stop for RComp. Last year we saw Messenger Pro 9, NetFetch 5.5 and so on, but I think it's probably, I probably talked enough on the RComp and RComp Interactive front there. Before I switch to do a brief RISC OS Developments thing, is there anything anybody wants to ask me about RComp or RComp software or anything RCompy?
Andrew, is OAuth 2 on your radar for Messenger Pro?
OAuth 2 is a bit of a nightmare, frankly. It's on the radar. It's not a massive priority. If you actually look into development of OAuth 2, it isn't standardized. It's basically a method for using HTML content in a login process to allow two-step type authentication for servers, and it's left as a down to the implementer to decide how they implement it. So it's different for, say, Microsoft versus Google, etc. So you can find, if you look up Pegasus Mail and OAuth 2, you can find a rather expletive-laden discussion about how one author of an email client went about doing OAuth 2 and ultimately got blocked by the different manufacturers wanting crazy amounts of money as payment for approval, to be officially authorized to use the OAuth 2 servers and connections, and to be treated as a member of society, as it were. I think it was something like £20,000 was required as a payment to get into the structure. So honestly, that's out of my pocket as something that I can afford to do. For now, there are workarounds for Google, not so much for Microsoft. Although I did see somebody who was managed to do something with Microsoft, so I'm not quite sure how that was achieved. But it's on the radar, but I'm not going to make any promises on that.
Okay, I appreciate that, but it is a pain if you're trying to use Messenger Pro as an email client and they start requiring OAuth 2 support.
Yeah, as I say, the fact that it's not standardized makes a real mess of any kind of attempts to implement it. And because it requires HTML, you also need a web browser for that step, which would not be sufficient to be NetSurf. So, Iris would obviously fill that role, but again, it's sort of integration. We could hardly sell Messenger on the basis that it requires the user to have Iris to be able to log into stuff. So never say never, but it's a fairly monumentally large piece of engineering, and currently, as I say, only required for Microsoft's Outlook.com services. I appreciate for users of that, and I am a user of that myself, so I do appreciate the need for it, but I also have to be a bit realistic because it is not a small undertaking.
Andrew, have you given up the development of a Compute Module 4 based computer?
No, it's still. The design work remains all done. Component availability remains the problem.
Right. I'm keen to get my eMMC working on the Compute Module 4 on a WaveShare board, but I don't see anything happening on that.
We've had email exchanges about this. My answer remains the same as I gave you before Christmas, that the first stage is to make sure that all of the code has been properly filtered through through the official channels, and that will help to some degree. But ideally, an additional piece of engineering needs to be done.
Yeah, I won't press you on that, Andrew.
Yeah, I did go into some detail, I think, for you before Christmas.
No, you did, and I won't press you any further. Thanks.
I think we'll come. The answer is we'll probably need to come back to it after 5.30, but it remains something that we want to see done.
I mean, one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to test the 5.30 release candidate for the hard disk on my WaveShare board with a Compute Module 4 running RISC OS 5.28 and the ROD stack, and then feedback. But when I get round to it, I don't know.
Well, obviously, keen to hear your findings of whatever you find on that score. I mean, as I say, my understanding is that the work that was paid for last year should have filtered through to 5.30, but I haven't had final confirmation of that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Any other queries? Okay, so I'm now going to sort of change my hat and talk briefly about ROD stuff. Obviously, we tried to get a few Christmas presents out from ROD. We saw 7.03 of the TCP/IP stack delivered. A couple of people asked me sort of why the ROD stack is number 7. Why isn't it number 6? Because of IPv6 and RISC OS Open having the 5 series. Simple answer is that if you do a star help on Virtual Acorn, you'll see that the Internet module has been numbered 6.0 something or other. And rather than create version conflicts, I'm a bit of a fusspot about versioning. I get quite angry if people put 2 versions out with the same version number of the same thing. I think that's wrong. So we decided the best way to avoid conflict was to call it version 7. And there wasn't a version 7 elsewhere in the wild. So that was the reasoning for version 7. It is less fun being, calling it 6 when we've got IPv6 was kind of appropriate. But as I said, it would have resulted in version number conflicts. And since Virtual Acorn is an active product and you can buy it, it seems not overly sensible to generate version conflicts if we don't have to. 7.03 of the stack basically brought online general compatibility with pretty much every pre-existing machine back to RISC PC era. That's been ticking around in beta since the middle of the year, and quite a few people already had access to it, but it formalized availability of that, and that means that pretty much anybody who has a sort of vaguely modern RISC OS system from RISC PC onwards, calling RISC PC modern seems a bit weird, but in practice it means things like RPCMU, which is much more modern, can utilize the new stack for development purposes. It also expanded the documentation, standardized various issues with Resolver to ensure that things weren't branching between the two, what Rob were doing and what we were doing, and just generally sort of tried to ensure maximum compatibility with the maximum number of things. We updated the DHCP module. For those unfamiliar, DHCP stuff had never been formally documented, so we've documented it and made it the ROD DHCP implementation offer up the same structures and facilities that were present on the previous undocumented DHCP implementation, so that applications that were written to use the DHCP previously can still work with the ROD stack, vice versa, whilst also outputting some more humanly readable information and generally expanding what's available, but within the realms of being compatible with what went before. Ditto for the Resolver. and it's just general all-round improvements to both the what software does and its compatibility, and as I say, making more documentation available to developers than has ever been available before. But previously, the documentation was tied up in legal knots with licensing. So because we've clean roomed a lot of this stuff for the new stack, we can produce documentation that finally reveals how things like the resolver actually work. It's all good stuff for the TCP/IP stuff. So that was Christmas present number 1. Christmas present number 2 for Iris testers was a brand new Iris version, which I will demonstrate in a minute. And the final Christmas present, which didn't quite make it, which should be available sort of at least sometime this month, is the release version of Pinboard 2. But that's done, but is awaiting me writing some words to actually the website to say this is what it is and this is what it does and this is what it offers. Otherwise, we'd be in danger of putting something out and nobody would know what it was. So I just need to write a sort of couple of paragraphs of explanation about what the thing is, and then it can be uploaded to the website and released. So it's just waiting me to finish the wall of emails and things that I came back to on Monday after Christmas. So once I've got through the backlog of that, I can write some words and we can get that out. In the meantime, as usual, if anybody wants a copy of that, just drop me an email and they can have the product email to them, the source code, and feel free to have a play. So I will go back to screen sharing again for a moment. And share, and we will go to a quick demo. So I mentioned Iris RAM. This was a little program that I knocked together at the end of last year to basically automate using the RAM disk with Iris, which can give some tidy performance benefits, particularly with things like the font caching system, which sort of assumes a cached filing system, which RISC OS isn't, because it originates in the Linux land, filing systems there are cached in RAM, so they can sort of make assumptions in terms of performance that isn't necessarily true on RISC OS. So Iris RAM basically allows Iris to get the maximum performance on systems with large amounts of RAM. The average Pi board has a minimum of sort of 2 gig. So we might as well be using some of that for speeding up Iris. So if you simply run Iris and a few seconds later you're all set, and you'll find Iris in your apps folder, 1, 2, and we're on the icon bar. You'll notice across the top of the page we now have a hot list bar. We've got a favorites icon at the top right here, which we can add new bookmarks to. We can use menus to add to different things. We can click the hot list. We now have bookmarks and bookmarks bar. We can drag and drop between them. So you can see RISC OS Developments there. If we go into sites, these are the sites that are on the drop-down menu here. So for example, we've got computers here. If I drag and drop that into sites, you can see that computers has now been copied to sites. In the very latest version, we also have a little menu, so I can then delete that from the main toolbar. I go back in and then pick it up and to bookmarks bar and then just drop it back in there. You can see it's now appeared, and if I drag it up to here, it changes the position on the bookmark bar. Various buttons to control this or the menu. So that's sort of big new functionality. They've completely revamped bookmark system in the latest Iris build. Over Christmas, we fixed some zero-page issues that had cropped up and been reported. So some of the support modules and things have been updated. We found a rather nasty one where the just-in-time JavaScript compiler would actually it basically compiles to thumb instructions, which is somewhat unique under RISC OS. And the JavaScript compiler could sometimes produce thumb code which was not zero-page friendly. We managed to sort of track those down and fix the sort of built-in compiler to resolve those issues, and that some worthwhile fixes there over Christmas. Other than that, Iris making good progress, but still, it's still beta. There's still things to do before we can do a release version. But we're trying to whittle that down. We started making lists of sort of essential to have, nice to have, really not necessary, so that we can prioritise the sort of final stretch of the development work to get Iris properly out of the door. The other little fixes somebody has been asking about. There was an issue where you had sort of multiple local files linked together. You could end up in a situation where if you were testing local files, you could end up just seeing the source code of a page rather than an actual page. That's now been fixed to sort out that particular issue of local file handling. So local file handling should now be on a par with remote file handling, which is good. That's ticking along nicely. And Pinboard 2, we go into Pinboard 2. Pinboard. Loaded my backdrop again with Pinboard 2, so you can see the red pins indicating that we're running Pinboard 2. Now, Pinboard 2 basically acts as makes the desktop much more useful by allowing it to act as a full sort of filing system. Things can be saved to the pinboard. You can have a text file and you can go save text file to the pinboard, and then we can press menu over that and treat it just like a filer. All the usual delete, etc. You can open the pinboard file, see the contents of the pinboard. We can delete a file out of the pinboard folder, and you can see it immediately disappears from the desktop as well. So it's got a very dynamic connection between the desktop and where the files are stored on the disk. You can configure where everything is stored using pin setup. You choose where are we? Pinboard dir. You can just you can drag, say, where you want the files to actually be stored on your hard disk if you're not happy with it in being boot choices. Auto saving on exit. How overwriting is handled. New features in the latest build include the ability to bring things to the front automatically, so we can click on the pinboard and go show pinboard, at which point you can see that everything that's on the pinboard appears, and then when we're finished you can see the big red button in the bottom, click to restore pinboard, and everything comes back. I'm sure previously you've also seen things like the sticky facility, so we can put notes on the desktop. We can set a title. Set the color, change the font. And that will be saved and reappear when we reboot. Sticky keys can easily be deleted in standard RISC OS manner. We can do watermarks, which allow draw files to be incorporated into the RISC OS desktop. Backgrounds, we can do things, wide range of file formats. They can be pre-cached and pre-converted so that they run at full speed rather than having to watch JPEGs redraw when you've got a huge JPEG. We have, using a full screen background, we can do icon bar transparency. So if we set that to say 90% and set, you can see that we can now tastefully see the backdrop through the icon bar at the bottom here. It's a small thing, but it's fun. And that copes with things like icon bar scrolling and what have you. I tend to find that a sort of fairly high opacity is good because you get a sense of what's behind it without it becoming a problem in terms of matching RISC OS icons to the backdrops. So yeah, Pinboard 2 finally on public release, hopefully this month. And we hope you enjoy it. It will come with downloadable source code, so you can see how it's done. And obviously, if you make any changes, we'd like any changes to be fed back so that everybody can benefit.
I have a question on it, Andrew, before we move off it. I've had a misunderstanding. I thought I could drop stuff on the pinboard and they would be there, but that's only true of saving out of programs, as far as I can see. If I drag a file onto the pinboard, I get a shortcut.
Yeah, this is because of how pinboard has traditionally worked. If you drag something to the pinboard, it is treated as, by default, just from a filer window. It does create a shortcut to it because that's how pinboard has always operated. Changing that would be a bit of an anathema.
No way of forcing it to take it. As if I'm trying to use the pinboard as a general scratch area, which is quite handy. But
well, I mean, one thing you can do is to just press menu and go open. Open pinboard dir, and if you drag things into
and drop it into that. Yeah, that's okay. That's fine.
To sort of take media and stick that into there.
Yeah, that'll do nicely. This mostly stuff I've got in the RAM disk. I'd just like to move it onto the pinboard, so it's a bit more permanent. I can muck around with it.
And that's permanently stored there, and you can easily access it through the pinboard or what have you. And then delete directory. Oops. Set to supposed to have been fixed. It's set to warn me about before it deletes anything permanently. That's configurable. So that would be one way around the solution. I believe if you move things to there, it's also shift drag. I think that works.
No, it doesn't work. It just makes I tried shift drag, I tried copy from the menu, tried move from the menu, and it makes a shortcut.
Okay.
It's worth looking at, I think.
That possibly is something for a 1.01. As I say, there's a subtlety there that you don't want to create something that is wildly different to what people expect RISC OS to work like, because one of the overriding tenets for Pinboard 2 has been to try and produce something that is as much as possible a drop-in replacement and doesn't feel wildly different to what went before, while still modernizing what you can do with it to make it more useful. So what we didn't want to do was end up with something that sort of just felt like a complete copy of Windows and Mac OS down to the exact behaviors, because then it would cease to be a RISC OS machine. You want the ongoing continuity, connectivity of how RISC OS has already done things, whilst expanding the functionality with more options and flexibility for users to get more functionality and features. So yes, food for thought, quite exactly how we implement something like that. Possibly one for discussion with Andy Voyer, who's the developer on that.
Okay, thanks.
But I do suffice to say that the reason I had an answer for that is it's something that I had thought of before. It's something I can see a use for. So yeah. Okay, so as I say, it was going to be very quick on RISC OS developments because that wasn't my priority tonight, and I didn't want to sort of go on and on and on and on forever. So I will leave the RISC OS development stuff there. It just gives you a quick overview of what we're up to. If I stop screen sharing there for now, does anyone have any questions about any of the RISC OS development stuff that you would like to answer? I noticed a question from Chris Johns in the chat that I didn't answer in the RComp section, so I will go back to that. Raw files from DSLR. Short answer is no. Photodesk itself doesn't handle raw files. However, there is a superb program for RISC OS which we use in complement to Photodesk, and I have chatted to Anton Reiser about whether we could include it in the zip, called RWROCC. Very hard for me to pronounce it. RWROCC. And it is surprisingly good. I don't mean surprising because of where it's come from, just it's one of those like hidden gem programs where you load it up and you think, crikey, this is good. It's by a guy called Anton Reiser, and it handles quite a range of different DSLR camera raw files. I know my colleague at RISC OS Developments, Richard Brown, he's very much into photography. I'm not really a photo person particularly. Richard is very much into photography, and he has quite a nice Nikon camera, and he was able to take the raw files straight from that and load them into RAW. He had decent performance. He was honestly a bit shocked because he was used to doing all this on his Mac, and he loaded them into RAW, and his comment was that this was all I'm not going to say it's a sort of Lightroom replacement. It's not, but a lot of the basic stuff that he would do in Lightroom on a subscription basis, he could do free of charge on RISC OS in RAW. And honestly, he was quite bowled over by it. And then you can literally drag and drop files out of RAW into Photodesk for editing. So the two programs, literally can sit on the icon bar together, and you can drop from one to the other. And what Richard was doing was processing them basically in RAW, and then I think he requested an add-on to RAW to save as TIFF, and Anton obliged, and so he saves his TIFF onto his NAS and then loads those into his Mac programs for what he doesn't do in Photodesk, he can do with his Mac programs. So. And yes, it's literally RAW, exclamation mark. If you've got one of our machines, you'll find a copy of it supplied in the images folder or graphics folder, depending on which generation of the machine. So it has been bundled with RComp machines for quite a long time in different versions. Otherwise, if you do a Google search for RAW and RISC OS, you should find Anton's webpage and be able to download the latest build from there. That's how we handle raw files. I don't particularly see a need for Photodesk to grow its own raw file processing facilities, given that our raw is surprisingly decent out the box and is only likely to get better. Sorry, I heard somebody say something. I didn't catch what it was. No? Oh, okay. So big thumbs up for our raw if you're needing to process raw files. There is also a command line thing called dcraw, DCRAW, which again, I think we supply with the machines, but that might be slightly more flexible, but it basically has no user interface. It's a command line thing, whereas our raw is a nice sort of desktop application with sort of pretty windows, and just generally it's a fun program to look at and use. So back to RISC OS Developments. Any questions on what RISC OS Developments is up to?
Andrew, going back to Iris, is there any plans to sort of allow the integration of bookmarker applications like Bookmarker? Yeah.
I think my comment there would be I'd like to have a chat with, is it Nick Roberts?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be honest, it's not on my priority, on the sort of list that I mentioned of nice to have, essential to have, and so on. It would probably fall in the somewhere in the nice to have to not essential area rather than the essential to have facilities. But on the other hand, I would be quite happy to have a chat with Nick about what we can do to help with that. We have standardised our bookmark format as an XML file now, so it is fully readable, writable, metaboutable in the choices folder. So that is something that could be handled by a third-party program. I don't think we currently have the ability to sort of replace the bookmark facility with a third-party one. So, excuse me. It wouldn't be a transparent replacement, but as I recall with Bookmaker, effectively a lot of it works by you opening the Bookmaker window and double-clicking on entries and things and what have you. And all of that should work quite happily with Iris as it stands, because it implements all of the standard RISC OS protocols for launching and opening and what have you URLs. So, and you can copy and paste locations and things into other windows. So I would have thought already you could do quite a lot with Bookmaker and Iris just by using sort of cut and paste and sort of double click and drag and drop. But yes, I mean, if discussions were to be opened, I would be more than happy to sort of hook Nick up with the programmer so that the two can sort out what. At the moment, it's really just a case of priorities. It sounds a bit terrible, but we're itching to get these formally out rather than being in this sort of perpetual beta state. And as I say, there are some things that we regard as showstoppers that need to happen. There are other things that are, that can go into a sort of 1.1, 1.2 type release rather than being necessary for getting it out the door. But we're just conscious that we're in a how long a piece of string type territory. What's important is that we deliver something that's stable and robust and actually does what it says on the tin and doesn't make RISC OS look embarrassing when new people try it out. So that's really the priority. And once we're satisfied that we've tidied it to a point where, RISC OS can feel like it's in a better place than, say, I don't know, some of the other hobby operating systems, then that's where we want to be. Ideally, I'd like it to be on a par with what you can do on Linux. I think possibly that's a bit optimistic for a 1.0 release, but I would like to sort of see some of these other. I've got to be careful because I don't want to set myself up for a fall, but suffice to say that there are other hobby operating systems out there. They are not necessarily well served by web browsers. Therefore, it's an ideal place for RISC OS to actually deliver something tangibly better than other hobby operating systems that, we could go from being, and also ran as far as hobby operating systems are concerned, to actually, hold on a minute, here's a hobby operating system that you can actually do useful things with on the web. But we need to ensure that the first, what people experience when they run the program is something that works reliably and does what it says on the tin. What we don't want is sort of load it up, it's crashed. That sends all the wrong messages. So it's a case of making sure that the product we deliver is both integrated with RISC OS in a nice manner and also stable, robust, and does most of what most people want.
So I don't know the pronunciation of it, but there was a mention on the register today about beta 4 of Haiku, the operating system that came out of BIOS.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they actually did name check RISC OS and everything you've talked about tonight, Andrew. Wireless, a good browser, and perhaps updating the interface a little bit were the three things that they said RISC OS lacked against this beta 4. So it looks like you're going on the right lines of filling that gap.
Yeah, I mean, we have a game plan of what's required, and so we just want to get. I think Rule touched on in their talk last year the need to balance sort of rushing something out and ensuring that something is as good as possible, and we're just trying to, within the remit of knowing that, we want to deliver something ASAP. We want to make sure that what we release is as good as it can be, as with all of our releases. The TCP has been a solid release across the different versions. Yeah. Similarly, we do a lot of public testing on these products, so that when we release the products, we know that they're going to be decent and work. We've done TCP, we've done, Iris, TCP leads to wireless, Pinboard 2 again, long public beta, so that, we can bash out all the problems and deliver something that, is going to work for everyone. And I think that's quite important with an operating system, is you don't want to release an operating system with holes in, because if the operating system is wholly in a bad way, that's not going to win any favours as far as new users are concerned.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I used Pinboard for a while, let's say about 9 months ago, and it was a bit flaky, so I took it out. But 3 or 4 months ago, I put it back. I think it's as solid as a rock now. I haven't had any problems with it at all.
Yeah,
it doesn't always behave how I expect, but it doesn't bug.
This is it. We're sort of trying to. That's why we go through the processes that we do in terms of testing them and what have you, and making sure that the source code is there for people who want to investigate into it, and yeah. So.
Yeah, just a quick question on Iris. I've got a version on the Pine book I got off you, but I was wondering if there's sort of like a minimum recommended thing. Would it be a Pi 3 or a Pi 4 to run Iris on?
I mean, technically, I think you can run it on a Pi 1. Well, maybe not a Pi 1. There's BFP issues with Pi 1, so I've got to be a little bit careful. I think Pi 2 and upwards, or a Panda board upwards, is technically the minimum spec. To have a good time with it, I would probably recommend a Pi 4 or a Pinebook Pro as being the sort of Pi 400.
Yeah. But if it's sort of usable, I'm not bothered about speed to some extent, as long as it gets places,
On an original Pinebook, which is sort of more equivalent in performance-wise to something like a Pi 3 B+, something like that. It's perfect. Within the remit, it's probably beneficial to use Iris RAM to run from RAM disk rather than from.
Yes. Yeah.
Then it should be quite. I'm not going to say pleasant, but you can do useful stuff with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It
just happens I've got a Pi 3 and I've not got a Pi 4 yet, so that's the reason for the question.
I will say that my development platform for when the programmer sends me new code drops, and I build it into, essentially the process is he sends me a code drop and I build that into the sort of application that we put out, and I sort of piece that together and add in necessary parts and expand certain other bits. The platform that I do that on is an ARMX6. So that's basically a Cortex A9 quad core with a single core actually active, running at a little over a 1 gigahertz thing. So the Pi 3 was a Cortex A53, which is, I think, clock a touch slower than the ARMX6.
Right, yeah.
But it runs at a slightly higher clock speed, 1.2 gig, if I remember rightly. So, what you lose on clock speed, you gain on. So what you lose on processor efficiency, you gain on clock, something like that. So it's broadly going to be the same sort of experience. it's not great, but it's also not terrible. If I can use that as a development platform, I would have thought you'd be able to make use of it on that.
Yeah. I was wondering, obviously, when you were saying about loading from RAM, there's enough to run stuff because nearly all our programs are small anyway, aren't they? So,
Iris is pretty huge. You need a RAM disk of about sort of 150, 160 meg, I think, is the minimum.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah.
I recommend a 256 RAM disk on a Pi, just as a general rule of thumb anyway, that, I think the small, I know there were some 512 meg Pis kicking around, but the majority of Pis that people use for sort of 2 and 3 would be 1 to 2 gig.
Yeah.
4s are 2 to 4 gig. So, generally, we would encourage people to use it on machines with a minimum of 1 gig RAM.
Yeah.
And ideally 2 gig if you're going to be using the RAM disk. But I mean, in practice, that means a Pi 2 onwards, I think. The IMX6 came with 2 gig. I think the Panda board came with 2 gig. Beagleboard original. The original Beagleboard was 512 meg, and the Beagleboard XM, which is what most people used, was 1 gig. So, the RAM requirements I'm spitting out are really not outrageous at all in terms of hardware that's been available for 13, 14, 15 years.
Yeah. No, I was particularly thinking of with like Pi 4 availability, if I could use my PineBook in one place and a Pi 3 in another and still get something half useful, that'll do.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Don't tell me we're actually through an RComp talk before 10 o'clock. Such things are not possible.
You're getting better, Andrew.
Either that or a few questions, I don't know.
Not quite slick yet, but getting.
Well, you'll never get slick out of me because I'm too honest. You'll get the real score from me, warts and all. That's what I do. So,
Andrew,
still on Iris.
Yeah, certainly.
I don't know if I've installed it not correctly, but I'm getting it hanging in the network process.
Okay.
Sometimes on its own, and sometimes if I quit Iris from the icon bar. And
I want to engage with you privately to have a little look at what versions of things are running on your machine.
It was the one you uploaded before Christmas.
Yeah, I meant sort of in the surrounding architecture, like versions of network stacks and versions of RISC OS and what have you, because that's not something that I've personally encountered. But I'm not saying it isn't an issue, but I would just want to sort of
well, it's an RMX6.
It's an RMX6
with your latest distribution on it.
The latest distribution. Okay, I mean certainly that's a fairly solid platform for me. So I would say let's talk offline and try and track down.
Try and get some more evidence.
The sites or something that you're trying to use, which I've not, and that I might be able to. Bottom line is we may be able to reproduce a problem that we can then fix if there is an issue. I mean, I'm not saying Iris is bulletproof yet. I didn't want to give that impression in the talk. That's why it's not out in everybody's hands as a public product yet. It's getting there. But I mean, for example, with the 0-page fixes over Christmas, they may help. So I would want to send you the latest one just so that you've got it to try. That literally came into my hands yesterday. So this week. So I'd like to get that to you to try in case that's also a solution to your problems. Because as I say, there were. I know that the Army ABI support module, which is a sort of shared system resource that Iris uses, they found a 0-page issue in there that was fixed. So that could have sort of, I'm not saying wide-reaching effects, but bottom line is it's possible that you were seeing something that we hadn't seen but has been fixed because, and where it didn't cause any issues for us, it may have caused an issue for you because of what other software you're using on your machine. So let's look at that, and then we'll try and diagnose why you're having the problem, because it should now be fairly solid. But I mean,
some sites are better than others, but
I would certainly say that. I'm certainly, as I say, I'm making no claims that Iris is production ready yet, but it's getting closer. And I would like 2023 to be the year of Iris. I would like it to be sooner rather than later. But I also, as I say, I don't want to, whilst ever we're getting reports like the one you just gave, that's not what you want a new user to experience. So that's why the perpetual beta. And
is there a bug reporting system? Or
not particularly. Just dropping an email to Andrew at riscosdev.com is the straightforward, or info at riscosdev. It'll get forwarded to me, and then I will sort of, obviously, usual procedure is that I will engage with the customer in terms of trying to see if it's something that can be tracked down and or reproduced, and then depending on the findings of that, well, I'll go on to the programmer with a bug report to be solved in hopefully the next version.
Yeah. Well, this one, I think, is dependent on what I've been doing, or if I've been using Iris for a few sites or pages, then it'll decide not to play anymore. So that's going to be a difficult one to find.
As I say, that does vaguely sound like some of the sort of what you might see with zero-page issues. So I think I would like to, because that's essentially zero-page stuff generally sort of results in unexpected issues, as something gets sort of random results back from a read, and therefore can jump off in an odd direction. And most of the time it's totally innocuous, and then one time out of 100 it's not. And that that kind of behaviour could explain your issue, but I don't want to say that is. But certainly, let's try the latest version, see how you get on, and then we can look to try and reproduce that and get the proper bug report to the programmer.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew, what's the current state of play with us potentially getting Samba 2 or Samba 3 going, especially in, say, Landman 98 or whatever? I know there's a bounty for Landman FS, but I prefer Landman 98. It's just becoming more of a problem. Somebody else today on your forum said they've had a problem with the QNAP device. They've managed to find a way around it, but I'm seeing the same potential thing with Synology. I've had to not upgrade it because they're blocking off Samba 1 now by default because it's not secure anymore. And more and more devices are blocking Samba 1. We really need Samba 2 and 3 to give interconnection to the outside world.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is the same one I gave sort of last year to this question. It's something that's there on our roadmap, but somewhat stalled because of lack of programmer availability, stroke skill set. Our programmer did make first. There's a few aspects to answer. As I said on the mailing list when this came up, there is a program called ShareView by Chris Granston, which does allow access to SMB 2 and 3 right now, and you can download that for free from riscosports.co.uk. And that will give you basic access to an SMB 2.3 device through RISC-OS. So, I mean, it's not a case where you can't use such a device on RISC-OS, period. You can, but it's a little bit crude compared to the elegance of Omni or Landman 98. Another programmer did make some good progress on. Excuse me for one moment. Steph, please. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, my brain has gone sideways. So programmer did make some progress in terms of managing to get logins and things working and enumerating of directories and things. He ran afoul of, if you like, the actual sort of filing system implementation issues, the ins and outs of sort of all the combinations of accessing files and basically developing a filing system is a non-trivial exercise, and then having to hook it into networking as well is a doubly non-trivial process. And we did look for and try and approach some people who had the necessary skill sets, but they weren't willing to assist. So that has fallen into something of a hiatus until programmers are actually available to assist. So in practice, that probably means after we've done sort of some of the TCP/IP work, Wi-Fi, etc., and then allow, then it will be possible to allocate some programmer time over to that.
Yeah, part of the reason I'm asking because I use SafeStore to back up to my NAS, obviously.
Yeah, so you need a filing system solution. I understand the need for a filing system solution.
Yeah.
I'm not unaware of the issue. If there were more RISC OS programmers, that would be extremely helpful. But the fact is, the people who could do the work, there's about 5 of them, and possibly 3 of them. It's not a big pool, and a lot of them are, otherwise engaged on things. Always looking for new programmers if anybody wants to do either as a paid or unpaid, or whatever fits with yourself and your working environment. We always want to hear from people who are willing to do stuff. But as Liam Neeson would say, it's a specific set of skills for doing this, not straightforward. So a lot of the time it's sort of taking those 3 or 4 people who are willing and able to do these things and scheduling time for them to be able to sit down and do the work.
Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you very much.
It is frustrating, though. You can probably tell that in my answer. I thought I'd found the necessary people to get it done, and
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Any more questions, anybody? Gone quiet.
Okay, right. I noticed a few people signing off in the chat, so good night to everyone who had to go. And thank you for all coming and attending. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for helping.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to the Wakefield hosts.
I shall cease recording in that case.
Yeah, well, thank you to Wakefield for having me. Always a pleasure.